Hello, my name is Dr. Bill Haugeberg. I am the assistant professor of low brass at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Here is my website and email. So go ahead and feel free to send me an email if you have any questions about anything I'm discussing here or just want to talk about something trombone related. Also visit my website because I have some other information up there as well. Here is a quick note about how this video is organized. To make this a little easier for you to practice, I decided to break the etude down into digestible chunks. These are about 8 measures apiece. What I'll be doing is playing these slowly with a metronome and counting them off so you can play along at home. This will help you practice and just make sure you're matching pitch, see what's going on with the rest of it. You will always go ahead and speed this up later on, but this is meant to help you practice just those small sections. And so I hope this helps. So, like I said, this etude has been broken down into short passages where I will play the passage for you with a metronome. All of these passages are at chord note equals 60, so you can remember that tempo. That's not quite performance tempo, but it's easy enough to practice and gives you a goal. So this is meant to start you in the process of learning this music. After I play through those 8 measures, I'll discuss the potential difficulties in those measures. And then I'll detail some specific practice techniques that you can use in the passage to help you be successful for the All-State auditions. This is a long video, so I also put timestamps in the video description of the link for each passage, as well as examples of the practice techniques presented. So use those. I don't expect you to sit down and listen to and practice along with this in one sitting. It would be much easier to go ahead and keep track of those timestamps and maybe even save those hyperlinks so you know where to go back. Also, for a full performance of this etude, along with other general practice tips, feel free to watch my other videos on YouTube, and there are many people who have put out complete videos of these etudes. Here is a list of the practice methods that I'll be using in this video. Singing. You don't necessarily do this in the correct octave. Our voice range might not match that of the trombone, so you might need to change it. Here's a video explaining more. Singing, not necessarily in that correct octave. Da da dia ba ba beep be ba dia ba ba beep ba. Another practice method that you can use is externalizing subdivision. Here's a further explanation. One effective method of really solidifying time is subdividing. Now, sometimes we don't know how to subdivide a passage, so we need to train ourselves to be able to subdivide. In order to do this, I actually externally subdivide the note. So I take the smallest note value in a phrase, and I play that instead of the written value. So in this instance, I'm going to be playing the measure 17, and right here, I'm going to replace the quarter note with 4/16, and every eighth with 2/16. Now I'm going to do this with a metronome, just make it so everything's really solid. And I would play it like this, just the first 4 measures, so you get an idea of how it works. So by working on that, I'm able to hear those 4/16 in that quarter, the 2/16 in that eighth, and make sure I'm waiting the entire time during those rests. This will help a lot with time. It's great also for dotted eighths and any passage that has a shorter duration notes. Hope that helps you. So like I said, using an external subdivision really helps to define the overall rhythm of a passage, and you can use this for anything that you play through all of these etudes. Here is another practice method that I really like using, playing with a drone. Here's a video to explain that a little more as well. A tuner can be a very helpful tool to identify individual notes that are out of tune, be it sharp or flat. However, using a drone will externalize the pitch reference. so you can hear exactly how in tune you are. And if you change the octave of the drone, so it's above what you're playing or below what you're playing, it'll also have an effect on your intonation. So when I use a drone, I try to go ahead and vary it. I might use tonal energy one day, or a cello drone, or I might go old school. Now when playing with a drone, it needs to be loud enough so you can hear it, so that you can match it. If it's too soft, it's not going to help you that much. So make sure you have good headphones or a good speaker system. Some might say it needs to be loud enough to be annoying. Another practice method that I really like to use, I'll work a passage from downbeat to downbeat. Here's a video explaining how I'd use that method. When breaking down a passage, it's great to go into the smallest chunk of music that you can think of. You want to make it so maybe one beat at a time is all you can successfully manage through that passage. That's fine. It's a great starting point. I do that all the time. I'm going to show you what that looks like at measure 33, playing from downbeat to downbeat. Then we're going to go 2 beats at a time and 4 beats at a time. Depending on how you play that, you might go ahead and repeat it several times, or you might just go on to see how it is in context. I'm going to do it once each. So what I'll do now is 2 beats at a time. You could also start from beat 2 while you're going through this. Then you could go ahead and do 2 measures at a time, 4 measures, however many you're working on. The idea is that you're playing successfully every single time. You could also do this at your max tempo, or you could do it at half tempo, whatever works best for you. Another great technique that I like to use is sometimes referred to as bopping. This is where you play the notes very short and you focus in on the attack. So you can do this 3 different ways: with a normal slide speed, early slide arrival, or late slide arrival. Here's a video showing that. Another practice technique I really like to use is something that band directors usually refer to as bopping the notes. Well, what you're doing is isolating the attack of the note. There's a lot of interesting things about how the brain perceives pitch and how this is actually really important. So isolating that attack to make it so it has a characteristic sound and is in tune is a very important exercise. Now you can do this with a normal slide motion, or you can also alter the slide motion. This would also work for valve instruments as well. What I can do is move the slide normally as I bop. That seems to be somewhat effective, but I enjoy moving my slide as early as possible and as late as possible, because when I move my slide as early as possible, I work on my note ends to make sure that I'm not getting slide noise from the end of one note as I go to the next note. And when I move the slide as late as possible, I'm trying to make it so that attack aligns exactly with the slide motion, the air, the tongue, and the beginning of the note. That will help me out with a lot of those attacks. So I'm going to do those 2 methods, moving my slide as late as possible and as early as possible on a short 4-measure phrase from the first etude. So that was as late as possible. Now I'm going to move the slide as early as possible. And as I'm doing this, I'm trying to make a characteristic sound again, so I can just add the air to sustain the note, and everything will have a nice clean front with full tone. Another thing to combine together with bopping is glissing. Here's something to go ahead and explain that a little more. Glissing is one of the most underused practice techniques for trombonists. I don't know why. Maybe it's because our band directors always yelled at us about getting that slide noise out of there, and a number of other reasons. But either way, Glissing can help solve a lot of issues. It goes ahead and checks in on your airflow and your tone, which lets you know if you're doing something weird with your technique. So I'm going to take a short example and show you how I would gliss it. This can help you with legato playing or staccato playing, any kind of playing. Because all I'm going to do with that is use my gliss airflow with my bop tongue, and I put the whole thing back together. It helps me to go ahead and work on both those back to back. So I might gliss first, and then bop, and then put them together. Because one, again, gets that front that I'm looking for, and the other gets the body of the tone that I want. You can also use it just to make sure everything is centered. Maybe that you're not doing some kind of weird pressure thing on your embouchure, or that you're blowing throughout the entire phrase. Again, I cannot recommend glissing enough. Gliss everything. So another thing I recommend doing when practicing is air trombone. Is air trombone. This is where I'm trying to do all of the motions from playing, but without the music. I can do this with the instrument. Looks something like this. So I'll be articulating, and I'll go ahead and move the slide in time. I could also do it away from the instrument. Sometimes I'll hold on to a pencil or a straw or something to go ahead and give the motion feeling. So it'd be like this. I could also do that just with the slide, or just with the air. Right, so all of these are great things. You could even combine this together with singing. Da, dee, bum, 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 bim, bum, 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 bum. Those are great ways to go ahead and isolate the motions away from the instrument. This way we're practicing the musical and the kinesthetic emotions, so that way this is not getting in the way. Another practice technique I really enjoy using is something I call Rhythmatize. This is slightly complicated, so if you want to, send me an email. I have an actual PDF printout that would explain it a little bit more in detail. This next practice technique is something I call Rhythmatize. It's meant to help whenever you have equal note values. It's kind of difficult to do when you're changing between 8th notes and 16th notes. You can still do it, but you're going to have to think through a lot of ties, and it gets complicated. So I'm going to show you a spot in this first etude that has two measures of continuous 16th notes and show you how to apply this. So first, this is the original two measures. So for the first two patterns, I'm just going to go ahead and alternate between short and long. So it'll be short, long, and long, short, long, short. We'll start with long, short, long, short. Hey, that sounds like a pretty bad swing. You're right. You can also make it so it's more of a Marshall dotted 8/16 and mess around with it. That one's fairly easy. This next one, we're going to flip it. So we have a short beat first and a long beat second. Sometimes this makes players turn the beat around and they put the accent on the wrong syllable. So I would go ahead and accent the downbeats a little bit when you're playing this pattern. It makes it so it's easier to keep the time correct. Now moving on, we're going to go into two note groupings. So it's going to go long, long, short, 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 long, 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 short, short, long, and short, long, long, short. I'll play through all those back to back so you can see how it would apply to this passage. longer sections of the music, and you can have a passage where you're alternating between 8th notes and 16th notes. You just have to imagine that those beats are tied together 16th notes, and then you have to think through the pattern and how it works. It gets a little complicated. So, working on this, again, we're trying to train our brain to connect those short notes into one continuous section. Go ahead and try it out and let me know what you think. Another practice method that's a little easier than Rhythmatize to employ immediately is when you alternate between half and full tempo. So here's a video detailing that. Technique that alters the rhythm, but it's not quite as complicated as my Rhythmatize patterns. It's just alternating between half value and full value. This could be over one measure, one beat, two measures, whatever duration you want. So looking at a pattern, I'm going to start off using one beat at a time. I'm going to go half tempo, full tempo, and then I'm going to flip it and go full tempo, half tempo. And then now reverse. And you can also do one measure at a time. And then reverse it. And you can do that for the entire piece. The thing I like about this pattern is it doesn't really matter if you have alternating rhythms between 8ths and 16ths. You can still manage to go through and work on changing the tempo. This helps your brain to go ahead and connect together the fast passage to make it work. And yet another practice technique I use is altering the octave. Practice technique is to displace the octave of something you're working on. You could either displace the entire passage down or up the octave, or just specific notes to make it so it's easier to hear what's going on and then easier to play. A great place to apply this is the opening. Well, you start off with a slur of a major 10th. What is that? It's an octave plus a third. So we're going to start off by playing that opening down the octave just to work on getting that interval in our ears, that large 10th. Now, we're going to work on just some other parts of it. So we're going to take that first note and keep it where it is, and we're going to take that G down the octave, just so we can really hear that third. That helps us hear that melody. Now, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to keep everything else where it's supposed to be and take that E flat up, just to make it so we're jumping into that register. Now, we would just go ahead and put it back together. You could also mess around with expanding your range by taking it up the octave, or you could even change some of the notes for that larger leap in case that's not working out well for you. But that's going to be another video. And finally, one last general practice tip is how to work on tuning in the trigger. Working with the trigger can be especially intimidating for tenor trombonists. We specialize in tuning those upper register notes, and so sometimes those trigger notes, they just are a little bit difficult to center or figure out where they go. So let's go ahead and talk about the trigger and just some general basic things. First, we get 7 positions with the normal slide. With the trigger, we only get 6. I know a lot of people go ahead and refer to those positions using the original trigger positions, calling something trigger 4.5, trigger double flat 7. That might work, but I like to think about it as a half step. That kind of helps me keep it in perspective so I know where that half step goes. So one really good thing is to start off just doing long tones in a normal register that you have great control on with the trigger. That would be that middle of the staff F. And hold down the trigger, you could go through the rest of those positions and mess around from there. You can also make it so you start from second or third with the trigger. This will help you center those pitches and just know where those positions live. Because sometimes when we're playing down the octave, we lip or we slow down the air, we manipulate the embouchure somehow to make it so that we're actually pulling the pitch down even though the position might be in the right spot, or the position could be too sharp and we're pulling down with our lips. Another thing, we have to go back and forth between our regular positions and our trigger positions. So you could do your regular long tones and start with the open horn and then press the trigger. And that'll just help you find out where those notes live. You could also do the same thing and then drop the octave. That's going to tell you if your air is actually changing the pitch or if your slide was in the wrong spot. Also know that you can move this. You can tune your trigger to an F or to a C, because the C is going to be on that third partial, and that C is going to be a little bit sharp. When playing tenor, I like to tune to that C, so I don't have to adjust when I go through here. Otherwise, you have to pull out a little bit when you use the trigger. It also makes it easier for me to center that low C, which is way out. And theoretically, we don't have enough tubing to actually play that note. So I hope that helps developing some of that trigger skills. Also, do long tones down in the lower register and just kind of find out where they go using drones. So those are all the general practice techniques that I suggest using. Go ahead and reference those or remember them, because as I go through the different measures, I will reference back to those specific techniques. So here we go. Measures 1 through 8. Here is measure 1 through 8 at quarter note equals 60. So I'll give you a count off. 1, 2, ready. So, measures 1 through 8. No, this is the main theme of the etude, and it repeats many times in different keys and with variation throughout. The opening interval is a slurred major 10th. Well, that's going to be difficult for some players. So, sing this interval until it's in tune, in time, and in the style you want. Practice it with that octave displacement that I showed at the beginning of this video. Work on this interval as a slurred scale, leaving out the notes as you progress, so maybe playing the entire scale, then playing every third note of the scale, every fourth note of the scale. Also, change the interval and work the intervals between. So try playing ninths, octaves, sevenths. Also, work on the individual notes as breath attacks, and be sure to know where your G lives. Here's a video that kind of explains a little more about that opening interval. The opening interval for this first etude can be quite intimidating for younger players, especially since it's slurred and it's such a large interval. A 10th. We have to look up what that is on Google. So, when you're working through this, try not to let that get to you. First, try the octave displacement that I did in the previous practice techniques. If that doesn't work for you, let's go ahead and get a little more systematic. I'd start off by maybe just playing a second and starting from the lowest note to see if I can slur up. Now you can do this chromatically, that's great. I'm going to keep it though in the key, so in the key of E flat here. And I'm working through this whole opening, trying to make it until I get to up that G. Now, I could also work that backwards. So I'll start on that G and start from an F below it. So I'm going to go down diatonically again, starting from the F. And we're working to make it so it's in time and smooth. Between those, that'll help out a lot. Another exercise that sometimes I do are breath attacks, because breath attacks have to be centered in order to sound good. So we're not using our tongue, we're just using our air. Because if there's some kind of sound in front of it, it's not going to be very easy to slur. That means we're doing something. We're manipulating something with our embouchure that we don't want to do. Then it would be just connecting those breath attacks. Those are all great ways to work on that opening interval, and I hope they help. Other aspects of measures 1 through 8 that you're going to want to practice, that's going to be the grace notes. Just so you know, grace notes are ornaments that happen before the next beat. Now, they're not strictly in time, but you need to know when you're going to play them and make it so it's the same moment in the measure on both occurrences. You're going to want to play these as a natural slur to go ahead and get that nice sound that we're looking for on the grace note. And if that slide movement is giving you some difficulty on that natural slur, work it as a lip slur first. So go ahead and keep both notes in one position and work on that lip slur to make it nice and even and full, and then add the slide movement. Be sure to maintain a full tone throughout, and don't clip those grace notes. Finally, know where your 7th partial notes live and tune them. Other problematic things you want to look into, the staccato. So be sure to play these notes as long as you can get away with while maintaining that staccato character. Playing these too short can create many issues that you don't want to have to deal with. Focus on keeping a clean front to each note and make the articulations consistent. Finally, here are specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing the passage as if you are auditioning without playing the trombone. Use correct pitches, sing in time, sing in style with good tone. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain your rhythmic integrity. Work to hear those subdivisions as you play. Play with a drone to help your intonation. Do that on the tonic of this in E flat, as well as other notes, perhaps the dominant, B flat, or the 3rd G, or any other note. Work this section one measure at a time, from downbeat to downbeat, and then do it 2 measures at a time. And finally, play this section glissed and then bopped. This will work on your airflow, your consistent tone, and it'll also help you isolate any articulation issues you might have. Measures 9 to 16. Measures 9 through 16. 1, 2, ready. So here are some things to look out for in measures 9 to 16. First, the articulations. So what do these various articulations even mean? Well, a tenuto staccato marking is used a lot in string playing. If it were under a slur, it would indicate the use of hooked bow, but the tenuto means the player would change bow direction, so it's similar to that hooked bow. Now, the addition of an accent to this marking indicates additional emphasis to the front of the note. So how would we even interpret these as a trombonist? Try to think of a long, lifted sound, maybe bricks with some space between them. And remember that an articulation denotes a desired sound, not an action on a part of the player. Do not interpret articulations as literal instructions on how to play the instrument. The arpeggios. Play these as indicated, but also try different articulations to help develop intonation, tone, and security. Tune with a drone. Do this to the root of the arpeggio, or the key of the piece, or anything else you want. Be sure that all the note lengths are correct and all the rhythms are even. Look out for those dotted rhythms. Ensure that the dotted eighths are played with the correct duration. I suggest practicing this with the externalized subdivision I showed at the beginning of this video. Play these bopped to ensure that you start the note at the correct time with the right articulation. Put the dotted eighths back into context and ensure that the additional music does not destroy the integrity of the rhythm. Also look out for those octave leaps. Be sure that your tone on both notes is consistent and beautiful. Please don't splat that lower note. Work the low register if you have an issue with those notes, and work on intervals in between the octave to develop security and consistency, much like we did for measures 1 through 8. Avoid excessive shifting and learn to play those smoothly as well as articulated. Here are some specific practice techniques to use in this section. First, sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. Use correct pitches, sing it in time and in style with good tone. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain your rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help with intonation. Work this section one measure at a time, from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed, and then bopped to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to isolate any articulation issues. Finally, alternate between half speed and full tempo every measure as you put the entire passage together. Measures 17 to 24. Measures 17 to 24. 1, 2, ready. So this is the main theme of the etude again, but it's transposed into the key of B flat major. So refer to some of the practice methods that I suggested for measures 1 through 8. Some additional areas of concern in this passage. Dolce. Know what it means. Look it up in Google Translate. Try to look at a musical dictionary if you have one. So would this indicate a dynamic change? Well, it means sweet. So do you want to change the dynamic? That's up to the player, as well as the judges. So know what your judges would want as well. I suggest using 4th position for the grace note Ds in measures 19 and 24, but be sure that the tuning matches the Ds in 1st position later on in the passage. Here are some specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. So that means correct pitches, in time, in style, with good tone. Externalize the subdivisions to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help with intonation. Work the section 1 measure at a time, from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. And play this section glissed and then bopped to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to isolate any articulation issues you might have. Measures 25 to 32. Measures 25 to 32. 1, 2, ready. So this is the B section, so refer back to measures 9 through 16 for some practice techniques. Some additional issues for this passage: learn how to tune your trigger and know where those pitches live. You need to move that tuning slide on your trigger every single day. And are you tuning to the F in the staff, or the C, or some other pitch? This will make it so you can either hit that low C easily, or you have to lip down or manipulate the embouchure somehow to make that happen. Play long tones with the trigger in a more stable octave to find the trigger positions, and then find those lower octaves. Often trigger notes are lipped into pitch. This causes poor response, muffled tone, as well as intonation issues. And finally, play that B flat in trigger third for that G minor arpeggio. Note also the difference in the articulations from measures 9 to 16, but take them with a grain of salt. Here are specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing the passage as if you are auditioning without playing the instrument. Externalize the subdivisions to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help with intonation. Work this section one measure at a time from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed and then bop to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to help isolate articulation issues. Alternate between 1/2 speed and full tempo every measure as you put the entire passage together. And play long tones in the upper register using the trigger to find where those positions live. Measures 33 to 40. Measures 33 through 40. 1, 2, ready. So here are some common issues for measures 33 to 40. The clarity of articulation while maintaining full tone. Be sure to play the correct articulations at the right time. You might also have some difficulty with range. You're going to want to spend some time developing security and consistency in the upper register. You're going to have to work on consistency of tempo and rhythmic integrity, intonation, and repeated slide movements. Well, when you're repeating a slide motion, you want to make sure that each time you are adjusting for every partial and fully moving the slide to the note. Some specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. I know you haven't heard that before. Externalize a subdivision to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help intonation. Work this section one measure at a time from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed and then bop to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to isolate articulation issues. Alternate between playing rhythms on one note and then on the written pitches. Rhythmatize continuous 16th note passages, and chain all 16th note passages together. Measures 41 to 46. Measures 41 through 46. 1, 2. Here are some common issues for measures 41 to 46. The clarity of articulations while maintaining full tone and full note values. Sometimes we make that second note sound more accented than the downbeat in measures 41 and 43, so be sure to avoid that. There might be trouble with consistency of tempo and rhythmic integrity, especially after any tied notes. Look out for intonation of those octave Fs in measure 41. I keep both in 6th position, so that way it's a little easier to keep them in tune. Be sure to make a noticeable dynamic change from the previous passage, and adjust for the intonation of each partial, especially in measures 45 and 46. This would be the tuning of that diminished 7th arpeggio. And also in that diminished 7th arpeggio, don't overplay the hairpin dynamics. This can make it so the higher notes are actually less secure. Here are some specific practice techniques to use on this section. Sing the passage as if you were auditioning without the instrument. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help your intonation. Work this section one measure at a time from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed, and then bop to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to help isolate articulation issues. Alternate between rhythms on one note, as well as the written pitches. And finally, chain all the 16th note passages together using forwards, backwards, and centralized chaining. Measures 47 to 54. 4. 1, 2, ready. So, this is the main theme of the etude again, but with some minor variations. Notice how we have 16th notes in between those intervals. Refer to those practice methods suggested in measures 1 through 8 again, but some additional areas of concern. Make sure you accent the second note of the figure. So this tessitura change can make the second note sound louder already, so please don't overplay that accent or let the accent affect your intonation. Be careful on the intonation in the descending arpeggios, especially if you're using the suggested alternate positions and playing that B flat in 5th. Focus on consistency of tempo as well as rhythmic integrity, especially after tie notes. And look out for that crescendo from mezzo forte to mezzo forte. So you can play that as a subito mezzo forte, or reduce the dynamic before the crescendo like it happens later on in the piece. But again, that's a decision for you to make. Here are some specific practice techniques for you to use in this section. Sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain your rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help your intonation. Work this section one measure at a time, from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed and then bopped to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to help isolate any articulation issues. Alternate between playing rhythms on one note and the written pitches. And finally, chain all 16th note passages. Measures 55 to 62. 55 to 62. 1, 2, ready. So, again, this is the second theme of the etude, but with some minor variations. Refer back to those practice methods suggested in measures 9 to 16. Some additional areas of concern for this passage: focus on the intonation in the arpeggiated 16th note passages. Also, the consistency of tempo and rhythmic integrity, especially after any dotted notes. play the correct articulation markings. So don't accent the downbeats of measure 55 and 59, but do accent the downbeats of measure 56 and 60. Some other specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help with intonation. Work this section one measure at a time from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed, and then bop to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to isolate any articulation issues. Alternate between playing rhythms on one note, as well as the written pitches. And finally, chain and rhythmatize all 16th note passages. Measures 63 to the end. 63 to the end. 1, 2, ready. So again, this is the main theme of this etude, but with some minor variations. Refer to the practice method suggested for measures 47 to 54. Some additional areas of concern for this passage: the accent on the second note of the figure. The tessitura change makes this note sound louder already, so don't overplay that accent or let the accent affect your intonation. Focus on the intonation in those descending arpeggios, especially when using the suggested alternate positions of that B flat in 5th position. Focus on consistency of tempo and rhythmic integrity, especially after any tied notes. And finally, use trigger third for the B flat in measure 70. This will help you prepare for that final E flat. Some specific practice techniques to use in this section. Sing this passage as if you were auditioning without playing the instrument. Externalize the subdivision to help maintain rhythmic integrity. Play with a drone to help your intonation. Work this section one measure at a time from downbeat to downbeat, and then 2 measures at a time. Play this section glissed, and then bopped to work on airflow, consistent tone, and to isolate any articulation issues. Alternate between playing rhythms on one note and then the written pitches. Chain and rhythmatize all 16th note passages. Putting it back together. After a complete run-through, identify any weak sections or especially troublesome spots. This can even be the section you practice excessively. Play 2 sections at a time to see if you can navigate your issues easily or if they come back. Afterward, add additional sections if you are successful. Record yourself. It will help. It'll help you identify consistent issues as well as excellent aspects of your playing. It'll also help improve time and intonation by identifying any issues you have, and it'll help you to objectively listen to your recording as if you were a judge. And along that line, what would you say to this player? So finally, thank you for watching. For any additional materials, please visit my website and feel free to email me with questions. Here is my contact information. I also have other videos on YouTube if you want to watch them, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.